Most people seem to have opinions about organic agriculture or regenerative agriculture. But once you get past the ideology, what does the data say about these approaches?
We are not seeing a significant difference between till and no-till, both in the conventional and in the organic. And so, in my opinion, I usually say no-till with no cover crops is no good.
That's Dr. Andrew Smith of the Rodale Institute, which has been conducting farming systems research trials for over 40 years to collect the data about these farming methods and a lot of the claims associated with them.
Things like lycopene, beta-carotene, anthocyanin, resveratrol. So these things that people are starting to hear about in their diet and really starting to understand that they're critically important for human health. These are pretty strong data to say that those are higher in organic crops.
Andrew doesn't shy away from questions about terms like organic or regenerative and about some of the misconceptions that can come with them.
The organic chemicals that are used are, I don't want to say benign, but they're not long lasting. Most of them are gone in less than a day.
Dr. Andrew Smith of the Rodale Institute on today's Future of Agriculture podcast. Hello, fellow Ag Nerd. Thank you so much for joining me for another episode of the Future of Agriculture. My name is Tim Hammerich, and if you're interested in where innovative ideas meet practical realities in food production, I think you found the right show. Today, we're talking to Dr. Andrew Smith of the Rodale Institute. I originally wanted to bring Andrew onto the show really to talk about the history of the Rodale Institute. It's been around for around 70 years and its contribution to agricultural research. For those of you who may not be familiar, the Rodale Institute is a nonprofit growing the organic movement through rigorous solutions-based research, farmer training, and consumer education. But I ended up focusing more on this episode onto the questions and his answers related to tillage, which he has some interesting perspective on based on the data they're collecting, organic claims and realities, again, based on their research, and then what they're learning from these long-term farming system trials. We definitely get into some topics that not everyone is going to be in 100% alignment on. So if your opinions about the future of agriculture are the least bit challenged from this episode, I guess I don't apologize at all, because that's a big part of why I do this podcast, and I hope a big part of why you listen to it, to hear from a variety of different perspectives. As I've stated multiple times over the years, although it's been a while, I think the future of agriculture is a collage or a patchwork of many, many different approaches, and those that are backed by data will survive and persist. So I invite you today to open your mind as we explore some of the interesting and important work that the Rodale Institute is doing. Oh, and if you're disappointed because you really were hoping to hear a lot on the history behind the Rodale Institute, again, that's why originally we were going to do this interview, check out the Future of Agriculture YouTube channel. I will go ahead and post that section of the interview on the YouTube channel that didn't make it into this episode. And while you're there, you can like and subscribe and do all that stuff that the kids say these days. Some background here on Andrew. Dr. Andrew Smith leads research and farm operations activities at all Rodale Institute campuses in the United States and Europe. With over 20 years of experience working in the organic industry as an agronomist, researcher, and farmer, Dr. Smith is passionate about providing science-based solutions to farmers and expanding the number of organic farmers and farmland across the globe. Formerly the Rodale Institute's chief operating officer, he earned a bachelor's of science in agronomy at Cornell and a master's of science in entomology at the University of Maryland. After 2 years of the Peace Corps, assisting a cooperative of small-scale vegetable farmers in Guatemala, and then 10 years farming organically full-time in Pennsylvania, Dr. Smith attended Drexel University in Philadelphia, where he earned his Ph.D. in environmental science with a concentration in molecular and population ecology. Andrew also owns a 140-acre organic farm with his wife, where they raise Shetland sheep and grow fiber and fruit crops. I'm going to go ahead and drop you into the conversation here, where Andrew is talking a little bit about the mission, vision, and impact of the Rodale Institute to provide research and outreach to farmers around the country and even around the world.
If you look at the nationally, Pennsylvania, which is a strong agricultural state, it's in most of the top categories for organic. it sometimes falls between second and fourth in total organic sales. And we look at that. I mean, I don't know if we have strong statistics to support this, but Rodale says, well, geez, we've been here for 70 some years. And because we've been doing research and because farmers could come see what we're doing, it's grown in Pennsylvania. What if we went to places where there hasn't been any research or hasn't been any education around organic, but there's strong agriculture? Could it grow there if we had a presence? And so we now have operations in Iowa, California, Washington State. We're doing work in the South in Georgia. And I think that's everything we have right now. And then we actually have, we started a project with collaborators in India recently. And we've, sometimes in the past have had some international presence. We've done some work in, I think, Guatemala, Costa Rica in the past. So that's kind of where we sit. And then that's our research. But around 2018 or 2019, we also hired our first consultant. And so our consulting program has gone from just one person that was supported by the state of Pennsylvania to, I believe, they have over 25 and likely have close to 30 in 2026. And that's spread throughout the country, where if a farmer wants to or is considering organic, or they are an organic farmer and they want to improve their production, our consultants will meet with them. And we'll even meet with conventional farmers who don't even want to be organic, but they're thinking about it, or they're thinking about some practices they want to improve, or they want to reduce their chemical usage. So our consultants are out there working daily. And what we realize is, like me and maybe a few others would get phone calls and say, hey, I'm thinking about transitioning to organic. Can you help me out? And I'd say, I can have a half an hour conversation with you, but I can't come to your farm. I can't sit down and spend the time that you need to really make it work. So that's been a successful program. And then we also have an educational program largely around farmers coming to the farm for a full season to learn how to farm. And we've also have several other farms nearby us that are more production farms, and they're connected to an institution. So it's about producing organic food for that institution, such as a hospital or a retirement community.
Oh, interesting. Okay. And so the hospital would come to you and say, we want to grow food organically for our facility, and you would help them kind of get that set up.
Yeah, I mean, I think the hospital is interesting. And this is an area, especially an area of interest for me, is a connection between soil health and human health, or how we farm and human health. And, many hospitals are successful. I know some struggle in some, especially some rural communities, but, this one particular hospital was growing out of Bethlehem and Easton, the downtown centers, and putting new hospitals at different locations. So they bought about a 500-acre piece of land and started putting up, $1 million buildings for a new hospital. And the president of the hospital one day in the spring says, "What's that smell?" And someone says, "Oh, well, the farmer's, spraying herbicides because he's getting ready to plant, probably herbicides and fertilizer." And the president of the hospital said, "Well, I can smell it. I mean, I can smell it everywhere in the whole hospital. We have a bunch of immunocompromised people. It can't be good that they're inhaling chemicals." And so the president said, "Go tell the farmer to stop spraying chemicals and that they have to grow organically." And the farmer just laughed and said, "Get out of here. I'm not going to farm that way. That's hogwash. That's stupid. You can't grow organically without chemicals." So they said, "Well, what do we do?" They said they called Rodale and said, "We want you to farm the land." We said, "Well, that's not what we do. We do research, So they said, "Well, we'll set aside, 10 acres. Now it's 14 acres, and we'll grow fruits and vegetables." And this conversation started to happen about, getting organic food and fruits and vegetables into the hospital, which now runs a major CSA program, community support agriculture program, for all of their staff if they want it. And it includes multiple farms throughout the region, because that farm on that site, the farm on that site can't possibly meet all the needs now for their CSA. So it's supporting a lot of other local farms. But I also just want to point out, they eventually started talking to the farmer, and they said that part of what they wanted to do was they were putting walking lanes through the farm. And they said, our people and our staff are walking through the farm. We don't really want them to, be contaminated with chemicals. And they also wanted to beautify it. So they said, we want some sunflowers and we want some other things, and the president ultimately found out, the farmer said, well, I don't know the exact number, but let's say it was somewhere on the order of like $5,000 to $10,000. It's $5,000 to $10,000 is what he expected to make off that land. And the hospital is putting up a $20 million maternity ward. $10,000, it's nothing to them. It's a rounding error. So they basically said to the farmer, well, geez, we'll give you $10,000 to plant the crops we want, to plant the things we want. And the farmer now is managing the farm organically and sometimes grows some crops that to him are very weird, but they look nice and the hospital likes them. And he's actually making money off of it. Sorry for taking so much time on that, but I thought it was an interesting story.
It's a great story. Yeah. And it actually sets up very nicely kind of where I was hoping to go with the rest of the interview here, which is kind of two directions, from a high level when it comes to organic regenerative agriculture. The first direction is sort of is it healthier direction? And then the second direction is kind of, is it agronomically feasible? And I think you could speak to both of those in the years of research. So maybe let's start with the first one. I think anyone who listens to that story, nobody's going to say, oh yeah, chemicals you can smell in the air in immunocompromised hospitals is okay. Don't worry about it. I think everybody's gonna be like, yeah, that doesn't sound like a good idea. But maybe if you could speak to it in more detail, when people are skeptical of the health claims of organic food versus conventional food, what you tell people about that.
Sure. And I was hired actually to start the vegetable systems trial. And that question is why I was hired. They basically said, okay, we think organic food is healthier. There's been a few studies out there. There's a little bit of literature, but there's a lot of pushback, especially from industry of that claim. So we need to put more science to that, concept that organic food is healthier. And we're working on that. It's been about 10 years. I've been working on both our farming systems trial, which is a long-term side-by-side comparison of organic and conventional grain production that started in 1981. And then our vegetable systems trial, which is a side-by-side comparison of organic and conventional vegetable production, as well as other work that we've been doing in this area. I would say that, probably some of the highlights, and some of this data is old, but we're starting to accumulate more data. Sometimes the conventional food has higher protein. And, when you use synthetic nitrogen, especially, you have more available forms of nitrogen that gets converted into protein. So you often see higher protein levels. Although in our trials, it seems to be crop specific. For example, in our farming systems trial, we actually have higher protein in our organic corn because knowing that corn is nitrogen consumptive, we've created the organic system to maximize the nitrogen when the corn is planted. But then our organic wheat has lower protein levels than the conventional wheat, but we don't see differences in yield. So both our corn and our wheat organic yields are equal to our conventional yields. So that's one difference, protein. But then that also means that there's higher levels of nitrate and nitrite, which is a negative nutrient tends to be higher in conventional crops. Let me think of the other. So I guess we have minerals and vitamins. We're tending to see in our data a trade-off between things like B vitamins, which have nitrogen as a component, and vitamin C. So there was some data trending towards higher vitamin C in organic. And what I think that is part of the nitrogen balance. So when you have higher nitrogen, you tend to have higher B vitamins because B vitamins have nitrogen in their compound. Nitrogen is one of the elements in there where vitamin C does not. So the plant, I think what's happening, and probably need to investigate a little more, but if you have higher levels of nitrogen, you're going to get higher B vitamins, but lower vitamin C. So that's an area that seems to be happening. And then most people, there's a growing body of evidence that these phytonutrients, or they might be called bioactive compounds, And we call them phytonutrients because they're produced by plants. And these are things like lycopene, beta carotene, anthocyanin, resveratrol. So these things that people are starting to hear about in their diet and really starting to understand that they're critically important for human health. These are pretty strong data to say that those are higher in organic crops. And then there's one that particular that we're focused on called ergothioneine, because it's actually, you wouldn't classify it as a phytonutrient because it's not produced by the plant. It's actually produced by soil microbes, mostly fungi, but some types of bacteria in the soil. And then the plant takes it up, and then it's in the plant. We know it's in a lot of different foods. We're just coming off of a project where we've actually identified the mechanisms for how it can move from the soil to the plant and throughout the plant. So that's kind of the research that, and then I guess the last thing what we know that's pretty strong is that there's higher heavy metals in conventional, and that's largely cadmium coming from phosphorus fertilizers.
And on the chemical residues topic, whenever I have this conversation about, the differences between organic and conventional, it seems like I always hear the point brought up that like organic uses chemicals too, and in some cases more harsh chemicals. Is there any merit to that, claim at all?
Very little. I don't want to say absolutely none. The first thing is that the organic chemicals that are used are, I don't want to say benign, but they're not long lasting. Most of them are gone in less than a day. And one of the biggest challenges that organic farmers have is I sprayed that on there and then it rained last night, or it didn't get contact with the insect that I'm trying to kill. So therefore they're not persistent in the environment. And so there's less likely they're going to be, people will be contaminated. I mean, you might have seen in the news this last week about approval of pesticides that have PFAS, which are, the forever chemicals in them and that have been approved. The chemical industry, they list the active ingredient, and then there's a lot of other things they don't list. Most of what those things that are not listed there are to allow the chemical to be persistent for a longer period of time, so that when the insect comes into the field, it'll make contact with the chemical doesn't break down and is gone. So I think that's one thing, is that the persistence, you could look at, well, is this chemical more acute? If you and I both drank a bottle of one versus the other, am I more likely to get sick? But the persistence in the environment is, to me, one of the most important things. And most of the chemicals, I want to say are benign, because all chemicals that we use have potential health impacts. But some of the ones that I think get a lot of attention are things like copper. And I guess the other thing I would just say is that organic, it should be, a holistic management system. And so most organic farmers, because they don't have the tools readily available to them, when they just grab something, and a lot of the chemicals that are organically approved aren't as effective. So they usually start with a system that prevents disease and insects and weeds through crop rotation, as opposed to, and I shouldn't put all, conventional farms in this category, but what I could see where farming has been tending over the last 40 years has been to become more specialized, less diversified. Often farms, as they get bigger, they're growing one or two crops. They're not growing 4 or 5 crops. And that might even go to the socioeconomics of farming, as well as the ecological perspectives of farming. And therefore you have to rely on the chemicals. And that's why a lot of farmers will say, oh, you couldn't possibly do this organically. So it's really, following nature and biology and natural processes first. So I don't know if I adequately answered that question, but I don't see that as an argument that the chemicals that are being used in the organic are persistent or toxic.
No, I appreciate you addressing it. And I think your last comment there brought up something else I wanted to talk to you about, which is, another one of the criticisms with organic is the use of tillage to manage weeds. And, you have some folks today claiming that they're regenerative, but they do use herbicides to control their cover crops, for example, or just their weed problems. And then you've also got organic farmers that, are using tillage as a tool We just had Dr. Aaron Silva on from University of Wisconsin maybe a month ago, talking about kind of organic regenerative. Is it possible? I know that's something that the Rodale Institute has been committed to, it sounds like, since day one. Can you talk about, is organic regenerative, is it something that can really happen? And with the systems-based approach, it seems very difficult to just kind of flip a switch and make it happen.
Right. Yeah, I actually listened to your episode with Erin. I just wanted to check out and hear what she had to say, but it was great. And she's been a great both collaborator with Rodale and champion of the organic movement. But yeah, I mean, I mentioned our long-term farming systems trial. And this is actually something I really think about a lot. So before genetically modified herbicide tolerant crops, Rodale was doing research on organic no-till and conventional no-till. Our organic tilled research plots always out-yielded the conventional no-till before genetically modified herbicide-tolerant crops, because you could spray and kill the weeds and then plant, but then how are you going to spray over the crop if you're going to kill the crop and the weeds? So you couldn't spray after that. And in organic, we can cultivate. So when we till, we can cultivate and we get rid of the weeds. And that's something that's been a major area of focus of ours almost forever, is how do we produce yields comparable to the conventional? Because most farmers don't want to really switch to organic if you tell them, even if you tell them it's more profitable and there's a price premium, but there's a yield drop. And then herbicide tolerant crops came in. No-till was growing. Pennsylvania is one of the leaders in no-till. And at the same time, our past farm manager and CEO, Jeff Moyer, was starting to do a lot of work on organic no-till, which was basically the method he developed with some other farmers even in the conventional area were starting to work on this. People like Steve Groff, who's in Pennsylvania, were growing a winter annual cover crop and then terminating that in some way and leaving it as a weed suppressing mulch. And that's a lot of the work that Aaron Silva's been doing. And Jeff Moyer developed the roller crimper, which I believe Aaron talked about, to be able to terminate those mechanically as opposed to chemically. But then you get into that same struggle. What do you do if the weeds start coming up and now you have all this plant residue and you can't cultivate? So that's an active area of research for us right now. But in 2008, we added no-till to our farming systems trial. And so now we have organic no-till, which has the roll down method, and we have conventional no-till. The conventional no-till has been continuous no-till. So there's been no tillage since 2008. The organic no-till, we call rotational no-till or cover crop based no-till, because there's no-till within a rotation. We still till to plant small grains. We till to plant our cover crops, which then get rolled down. So it's not a complete zero-till system. So we now have, 24, 25 minus 8 is what, 16? We have 16 plus years of data. And I think maybe the only trial in the world that's comparing organic no-till to conventional no-till, as well as tillage in organic and tillage in conventional. And I'll just say this too, in 2015, people said, well, wait a minute, you're doing no-till, but you're not using any cover crops. And we use cover crops, and cover crops are important. And we said, you're right. And it's not because we don't think cover crops are important, but it's because when we look at the country, 70 to 80% of the farmers in the country aren't using cover crops. And we're trying to create a systems. Yeah, we're trying to create a systems experiment where it's this method versus that. But, most of the farmers in Pennsylvania, especially, are using cover crops. And Maryland's a top cover crop state. So these are the people that we're interacting with. So we said, okay, that's fair. So in 2015, we added a cereal rye cover crop following corn and wheat following soybeans. So you had 2 of your plots every year had a cover on them and a more diverse rotation. And so I'm saying all that to get to the data. So from 2008, to present, but I probably don't have this year's data in front of me. The no-till plots have our worst soil health indicators. The conventional no-till plots have our worst soil health indicators. Our organic no-till, maybe it's a little bit better in the no-till than the till, but I don't think there's any statistical significance there. When we look at almost all of our data, and this is soil data and economic data, we are not seeing a significant difference between till and no-till, both in the conventional and in the organic. And we do 1 meter deep soil cores every 3 years and look at soil carbon and soil health indicators. We've had the Soil Health Institute come and do measurements in 2019 as part of their broad survey of long-term trials across North America. And so, in my opinion, I usually say no-till with no cover crops is no good. Just simply not tilling the soil is not really a strategy. And if you look at most of the long-term tillage trials, they're mostly in the chemical-based system. A lot of times it's corn monoculture, so you have no rotation. And if you just look at the till, no-till with no cover crops included, tillage looks bad. But as soon as you start adding cover crops and you start adding rotations and you start adding compost or manure, you start adding natural fertilizers, which tend not to degrade the soil carbon like the synthetic fertilizers do, all of a sudden tillage doesn't really show up as a major factor. And so we still do recognize that tillage can have negative impacts on soil health, as well as, if done incorrectly over broad areas, especially on highly erodible and sloping land, that you can have soil erosion problems. And that's one of the barriers to going from conventional to organic, is because you need to start to follow a more comprehensive conservation plan if you're going to be tilling more. And one of the reasons our agriculture has become less diversified is because if you look at the way the NRCS looks at conservation plans, if you're doing no-till, you can do your whole farm, right? You can do everything to one crop. You don't have to have contour strips. You don't have to have diversification. Those are mostly set up as ways to slow down erosion. But in an organic farm, it's tilling. That tillage almost forces them to have a conservation plan that makes their crop rotation and their farm, more diversified. So, I could probably get into a lot more. Maybe I'll let you, lead me in.
This is good. But so if I understood you correct, you're saying, hey, we're not seeing any significant, or you're saying actually the worst soil health indicators were from the long-term no-till, but it sounds like you're saying that the feedback you're getting is, well, yeah, but you didn't have cover crops, and cover crops really are where they're going to make your big difference. Is that right?
That's right. That's what I'm saying. So part of what we're actually finding, a lot of people say, well, yeah, you're going to have higher compaction in organic when you till more, but actually we have higher compaction, especially the surface layers in our no-till, because we don't have living roots. If you think about it right now, we've got corn that's been harvested and there's nothing living sitting there from now till maybe May of next year. In our organic plots, in most cases, we have something of a heavy, thick rye or vetch cover crop, and it can live, even now on these temperatures in Pennsylvania, it might even be continuing to grow. And I'll also just say that we added what I call the diversified conventional, so we added cover crops. The data I looked at was from 2015 to 2022. So after 7 years, there was no significant increase in soil carbon in that time. It looks like it's increasing compared to the less diversified conventional, but it's not statistically significant. So I also think that this panacea that we just go out and plant cover crops is a false one. And I'll just give a scenario. So farmers here in Pennsylvania, and probably throughout most of the northern, grain crop growing regions of the United States, are probably still harvesting corn, or they may have just finished up harvesting corn and soybeans. And so there's really not much time to plant a cover crop. if you do plant a cover crop, it'll come up and it'll probably start to grow in the spring. Most farmers want to get on that land probably even in April. And they also don't want that cover crop to interfere with their planter, which is one of the reasons why the roller crimper was important, because we were trying to encourage even non-organic farmers to grow your cover crop longer to maximize the benefit of the biomass it's producing before you terminate it chemically. But most of the times that cereal rye cover crop grows maybe 4 to 6 inches before it gets terminated chemically. So you're talking about, just to put it in perspective, probably 200 to 500, maybe 1,000 pounds of plant biomass per acre. Because we have a good crop rotation in organic, we get our cover crops planted in August and September because they come off after planting small grains like winter wheat, barley, oats, things of that nature. They're thick right now. And then we allow them to grow. And because we don't use fungicides and insecticides on our seed treatments, just because it's not allowed in organic, we can't plant early. We have to wait till the soil warms up. You know, when I took over my farm or inherited my farm and I went in the shop, I found these little pocket soil thermometers everywhere. Because most farmers would have gone out to the farm and they would have put the thermometer in the soil, and you wouldn't plant until it got over 60 degrees. And how did we overcome that? We add fungicide and insecticides as treatments to our seed. And now we're applying more neonicotinoid insecticides through seed treatment than we ever applied when we applied them directly to insects when we had the issue. So I'm setting that scenario up because we wait till May or June to plant. Or if we're doing our no-till, we have to wait till the plant reaches anthesis, or when it starts to flower or head, so that you can mechanically terminate it and not have it to come back. Our goal is 10,000 pounds per acre plant biomass. We would love to have even more than that. Sometimes you get 15,000. So if you're talking about 500 pounds of plant biomass terminated chemically laying on the surface versus 10 to 15,000 pounds of plant biomass. And then here's where tillage comes in. Because even if you do no-till organically, all that biomass is sitting on the surface. When you till it, it's now in the soil. And that's one of the biggest factors that we're seeing from soil health. We see, as we go down from the surface down to a meter, all of our carbon measurements, as we go deeper, are increasing in the organic. That difference between the conventional and organic continues to go up. But in the conventional no-till, because we've not even incorporated the crop residue, let alone cover crop residue, when you get below 6 to 8 inches, the soil is very deplete of carbon. And most of the research looks at the top 6 to 8 inches. If you're lucky, they'll go to 8 inches, usually 6 inches. So no-till looks amazing at the top 6 inches. But if we dug deeper and started going down, we'd actually find that tillage incorporates that carbon-based plant matter or compost, and we increase carbon. And the other thing is that we're having researchers showing that simple cover crop-based system, like with cereal rye. So there was a study at UC Davis, that their Century experiment, so it's a similar long-term research trial. When they just have cereal rye in the conventional system, there was increased carbon at the very top surface, but they went down 2 meters, and there was actually a loss of total soil carbon compared to no cover crop at all. But in the system, the organic system that included a cereal rye and a clover and a compost, there was a significant increase in soil carbon if you looked at the entire 2 meter profile. And I'm saying that because we have pretty strong research that's coming out that's showing that in order to accumulate carbon in the soil, you have to have the right carbon to nitrogen balance. And when you have simply plant a cereal-based cover crop like rye, which is what is the most prevalent in the country, and that's your only cover crop, you have a very high carbon in the soil. And then farmers have to overcome that high carbon to get and achieve higher yields by applying more fertilizer. So now it becomes more input intensive. Farmers have to apply more fertilizer. And then if they do no-till, they actually tie up the nitrogen even more. So they have to apply even more nitrogen. There was a study that came out recently, last couple of years, that showed that not tilling did increase the aggregate stability or the structure of the soil. So improved structure, which allows greater infiltration of water. But it also increased the amount of nitrogen applied. And the combination of increased nitrogen and improved soil structure resulted in much higher levels of nitrogen in groundwater. And then I'll just finish with saying that, last week, a very prominent soil scientist said to me, the organic soils, they have higher soil carbon, but they have really bad aggregate stability. So aggregate stability is, like I mentioned, that soil structure, the ability to the soil to hold together. And I kind of said, okay. And then I thought about it, and I said, I don't know if that's true. So I went back and looked at some of our data. We had a really good study that was done in 2021 by Dr. Sindhu Jayadamama at the University of Tennessee and her graduate student, James Luttrell, where it looked at aggregate stability 1 meter deep at different soil profiles. And the soil scientist was right. At the very top, the 0 to 10 centimeters, the top 4 inches, aggregate stability was better in the conventional and both the till and no. And we know, our soil scientists know that there's a strong correlation between soil carbon and aggregate stability. And we, in those same soils, another outside party did infiltration testing over several years. And our organic tilled soils and our organic no-till soils have approximately double the water infiltration rate than the conventional no-till. I think I'm going back to the fact that a lot of our research is looking at that 6 to 8 inches depth, and they go, oh, conventional no-till is the way to go, but they don't look deeper. I mean, you start to look deeper, things change.
Well, that's a good agronomic principle. It's probably also a good just general life principle as well. Well, I know we're running short on time here, but before I let you go, I'd like to get to, if a farmer's listening, like, okay, you've been studying this a long time. A lot of things you're saying are really interesting to me because I've kind of thought one way, and this is maybe a new approach. Obviously, you have this team of consultants that's helping people just like that kind of figure out what works on their farm. But is there anything you could tell us as far as like what you hope listeners like that would do with this information, or what's a good first step toward trying to come up with a system that may work a little bit better on their farm?
Well, the first thing I'd probably say is that, we have decades now of economic data, especially from our long-term farming systems trial. And I've looked at the economic data, just about every economic study that's compared organic and conventional, and they all show that organic farming is more profitable. In many cases, it's more profitable because of the price premium in organic. So some people say, well, if that price premium went away, I wouldn't be able to, it wouldn't give me that improved profit. However, we see that the demand side in organic is remaining much stronger than the supply side. So there's right now I'm not thinking of the word, but basically we have a much greater demand for organic products than the supply. So we believe that price premium is going to stay strong. But our most recent analysis of the farming systems trial found that our diversified organic system, because it had lower costs and had similar yields as the conventional, was more profitable even if you take away price premiums. And this changed from the analysis 20 years ago. And what I believe changed is the cost of inputs in the conventional ag have gone up. So the cost of fertilizer is going up. It used to be that organic seed was more expensive than conventional seed, but the conventional GM seed is more expensive than the organic seed. So we're really seeing that organic, to me, when I look at organic, it's a strategy to, be a more closed system, not be dependent on inputs. So not be dependent on market fluctuations, both market fluctuations in the inputs that you have to purchase, and also in fluctuations in revenue. This year, organic commodities are going to be higher than they were last year. But I don't know if you can say that for conventional, right? And I won't go there because you probably have other people on it more intelligent that can talk about that. But, we see the prices for organic going up in the future, and they're more stable, but you're also reducing your costs. So I guess what I would say to a farmer is that we have really strong evidence that you'll be more successful economically, more profitable, that you can do it. I think it's a risk. And that's where our consultants, what they're trying to do is mitigate risk. So I would say that if you even have just an idea that you're thinking about being organic, go to our website, find our consulting page. Our administrative assistant from our consulting group will connect you with somebody. You have the conversation. It's free. It's a free conversation. Usually almost all the consulting across the country is free. And if you're though, I thought about it, I talked with them, and it's not for me, that's fine, but at least you had the conversation. I met a lot of good, really amazing people and amazing farmers that have said, well, I was thinking about organic for the last 10 years, 15 years, and I finally did it. And their only regret was that they didn't do it 15 years ago. And I mean, this is a sad statement of affairs, I think, when I tell you this, but we were at a conference in Iowa, and our consultants came up to a couple of young farmers and said, hey, would you guys be interested in transitioning to organic? We could help you out with that. And these young farmers said, oh, we're going to be organic. And they said, well, when are you going to be organic? What's your strategy? And they said, oh, we're just waiting for Dad to die. As soon as Dad dies, we're going to change the land to organic. And I'm saying that not to tell you a story that's unfortunate, but that a lot of the reasons why we haven't seen greater adoption are social norms. In my opinion, the pressure from industry that wants to sell things to people and make profit, mentally changing the framework to make them think that organic is a bunch of hippies, organic is, it's this liberal group that's, it's people that's not founded on science. In my opinion, and I've been in the organic industry, and I've been an organic farmer for 25 years. So I've been to conferences where someone raised their hand and said to, the speaker, what do you think about organic? And they get laughed out of the room and told them they're idiots for thinking about organic. So what young farmer would adopt that when they've been told or demonized that it's, not a good practice? So I hate to end that way, but, I think that those social norms are changing. People are coming to the realization that organic is possible. And we didn't talk too much about the health impacts of, conventional agriculture and maybe so-called regenerative agriculture. But I think that farming communities are really starting to wake up to the fact that the way that they're farming or the way they've been told they need to farm is not healthy.
Well, I really appreciate Dr. Andrew Smith for being on the show here today. There's a lot more content in this interview with Andrew, so I'm going to post more on that YouTube channel. So just look up Future of Agriculture podcast on YouTube, and I will also leave a link directly to that in the show notes. So go over there to YouTube to find more of the interview with Dr. Andrew Smith, and thank you again to him. To learn more about the Rodale Institute and all of their work, you can go to their website, which is just rodaleinstitute.org. Also will be in the show notes as well. Well, thank you so much for listening. I do not take it lightly. I'll be back next week with another story of ag innovation.